Hey, David Brewster here, new episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Annihilator, and I've had a lot of requests to feature this legendary band, and I did just feature Jeff Waters in a 3-for-all before this lesson, and now we're going to look at some of Annihilator's chord-based, rhythm guitar parts. And there's a lot. Definitely, Annihilator is a legendary metal band. They formed in Ottawa, Canada in 1984, and Jeff Waters has been the driving force behind the band. They've had a lot of lineup changes over the years. But Jeff is the core member and the driving force of Annihilator. Definitely a great band, and I've had a lot of fun diving into their music and their albums, in prep for this lesson. So if you're a Jeff Waters Annihilator fan, buckle up, because here we go. So I did rant about Jeff Waters being offered the Megadeth gig several times by Dave Mustaine over the years, but Jeff always declined to accept his offer. And he wanted to focus on his own thing, Annihilator. And I really respect that. That had to have been a huge distraction. Like, should I continue focusing on my thing, or should I just jump on the Megadeth metal boat? And he stuck to his guns and continued to kind of push, his band and his project. And that's really respectful. That's kind of rare, too, because usually when a big offer like that comes, it seems like everybody packs their bags and does it. But with Jeff, he was like, no, I'm going to hold my ground and investigate what I'm doing instead of just jumping into Mustaine's thing. And that's really interesting and cool. And Jeff's such an interesting guitarist. Heavy thrash riffs, clean guitar parts, shredding solos. Great guitar player, for sure. So the chord-based and rhythm guitar parts in this lesson came from 2 classic Annihilator albums, and that's their first 2 releases, Alice in Hell and Neverland. And I was going to dive deeper, but honestly, those 2 albums have so many cool riffs and solos and songs. It was really hard for me to move past Neverland. And they've released 17 studio albums, in their career. And that's a lot of music to go through. There's an EP and like 3 live albums, 3 compilations or something like that. But there's something about the first 2 albums, like the album covers themselves. They look like horror movie, like VHS covers or whatever from the 80s. Definitely has that horror kind of gothic look to it or whatever. Demon dolls and like the creepy beach or whatever. And we're actually going to investigate some clean guitar parts, from Annihilator in this lesson. There are some thrashy, distorted riffs. But if you dig through their music and start listening to their albums, you're going to hear all these eerie and spooky sounding clean guitar parts too. So we're going to do kind of a mix and match, clean and dirty. So buckle up, here we go. With the opening, that's Neverland from the album by the same name, and it starts with all these clean guitar parts, clean guitar chords. Imagine that. And it starts with this E minor add 9 and just pick through the first 4 strings and let that ring, and then a G minor add 9 right there and do the same thing. And then an A minor add 9 like that. Basically reach up and grab that F. Now it's an A minor flat 6/9, implied. So there's 4 chords right there, kind of outlining this kind of clean, spooky kind of sound. Definitely sets the mood perfectly. Distorted guitars come in, there's a single note riff that kicks it off. something like that. So it starts with almost the same progression. You're doing that E minor add 9 there. So you're kind of banging off the low E open and then that chord low E open. And then you kind of pick through the top part of the chord. And then go to a G minor add 9 and do almost the same thing, like this. Like that, so... Then move up to a B minor add 9 right there, and then you're gonna pick through like the B to the A string. And then an A minor add 9, and then that's the high E to the D string that you're picking through. Something like that. Then you start picking through that series of chords and you're doing... So it's kind of muted and ringing ever so slightly like that, but the E minor add 9 picked like that. And then do the same thing on G minor add 9 right there. The same thing on B minor add 9 right there. And then the same thing on A minor add 9 right there. And then it kind of moves into the next part of the song. I just banged on that chord and then just moved that E power chord. But it keeps going, of course. That's just the glorified opening section. So those add 9 chords are really interesting. I'm a huge fan of those chords, and we've talked about them and featured them here before on the channel. But that's cool to hear, you know, that whole progression kind of made up of those minor add 9 chords. That's really cool. Now in the same song, Never Neverland, somewhere around 4:39, you're going to hear this creepy, clean interlude like this. This is really cool. Right there for sure. So that's like a C major 7 flat 9 implied. You're really just playing a C sharp octave and then the open D and the open B string. And you're doing that kind of backward pattern. And then just kind of alternate between the B and the G string. And then you're going to move that root note from C sharp way down to that B note right there. Pattern, you're playing the root note, then the open B, the G, then the open B, and you're going back and forth there. And that last time, grab that high E open right there. That's kind of like a B minor, like a B minor add 9 or a B minor 11 add 9. That chord definitely will keep your neighbors, you know, up late at night. You know, it's just unsettling and eerie, and I mean, you can find scary guitar parts with distortion, but more often than not, I find the clean guitar parts are scary and eerie. Also, like a piano part, like a real creepy kind of piano, clean guitar parts. That definitely adds the creepy kind of horror factor, which is really cool. Okay, next up's the dual guitar riff from Phantasmagoria from the album Never Neverland, and there's 2 guitars here. I'm going to use the MXR clone looper to kind of help me. And guitar 1, just like playing ringing basic power chords down here. E5, let it ring. And then a G5 and let that ring. And then F sharp 5, let it ring. And then F5 and let that ring. And then guitar 2 is the one doing the thrashy moshy riff right here. So it's pretty basic, but I like the way the guitars working together. One's ringing, the other one's just kind of, you know, repeating that same riff over and over. But it kind of implies and kind of pushes the tonality and that chord progression around a little bit like this. I love stuff like this. basic stuff, but once again, you know, that interplay between the guitars and both of them working together creates this additional tonality and this additional kind of, you know, riff or whatever. That's really cool. Next up's that main riff from Schizos Are Never Alone from the album Alice in Hell, and this is interesting, like this. Short and sweet here, not really that hard to play, but we're doing this descending pattern, you know, of 6 notes, and then there's 2 notes ascending. So you're doing this F, E, D twice in a row, and then you want to do this E to F at the end right there, and then just start banging on that low E, and then do that riff again, and then you hear basically an E power chord and then the low E open, like that. So you're doing, and then do that again. Then the third time you're just going to basically keep like banging on that low E right there. And the last time is the same as the first and the second time. So nothing really hard to play there. I just like the mix of the busy single note riff with the power chord hits, and that definitely establishes like the rhythm part in that song. Here's another riff from Schizos Are Never Alone. This takes place around 3:07, like this. Something like that. So a C sharp power chord, and you're kind of doing that gallop rhythm. And right there, that A, G sharp to F sharp. And then you're going to do the exact same thing, but in G down here. And then you're grabbing that E flat D to that C, and you're going back and forth there. Like that. And then the last time right there on that G, and you're gonna do this, and I guess you could like slide even higher and do it up there if you wanted to. I just put it right there because it's kind of convenient compared to where I am with the chords right there. But I have seen it up here. That's totally up to you. Because it is just kind of abruptly out of nowhere right there. So good luck with that little kind of shift in the riff right there. Okay, next up's the opening chord to the song Word Salad. This is from the album Alice in Hell, and this is very interesting. Definitely ear-catching too. Grab a Q-tip for that chord because it's definitely something you need to clean your ears out with, because that's really unusual. So that is a C add sharp 9. So think kind of like the Hendrix chord sharp 9, right? But we're doing C major with a sharp 9. You know, that's definitely very shocking. Like, what? And he's doing... So he's pulling off that E flat to the open D and then sliding that B into that C note. And then you're forming like a C minor bar chord, but the high E's open right there. Like that. And eventually he starts doing like that quick kind of hammer on pull off in there. The song takes off in a totally different direction after that, but when you hear that opening chord, it's very striking. Like, it just grabs your attention, like, what is getting ready to happen right here? It's like some kind of like guitar rituals getting ready to happen right there. Really cool. Next up's the opening to 6s and 7s from Neverland, and this is really interesting, like this. the song right there and starts riffing. But this is really interesting. And I love these eerie, spooky chords. So that's an implied, what, B flat add sharp 11 right there. And you hear this kind of double pick like on the bottom and on the top of that pattern. And then in the intro right there, when it gets to that G string, then it starts on the top and does that pattern backwards. Like that. So all the way through that first pattern. And then you let that ring, and then do it again, but don't add that double part. Then right there you're going to move down to this, and that's just basically F sharp minor when you add that A right there on top. And then you want to do that again, but open up that high E string. Now it's just an F sharp 7 implied. And then move down a whole step and then add that G on top. Now it's E minor right there. Like that. So you've got this interesting series of these kind of dreary, like dreamy chords. There and right there and right there. But that's really unusual, but really cool too. Sucker for those kind of, you know, just spooky, eerie guitar parts. Really, really cool. And clean guitar really does deliver that kind of sinister, eerie sound. Okay, last but not least is Imperiled Eyes from Neverland, and this is really cool and super eerie. There's two guitars here doing this clean guitar thing, and the first guitar is doing... guitar 1 right there, and that first chord, that's like an implied F sharp minor 11 flat 5, like that, and then you're gonna add a D sharp to the bass, like that. That's really wacko, but so cool. And then you're hearing that implied F sharp minor 11 flat 5, and he's adding an F sharp and a G up on top there, and he's picking through it. That's really out there, but so cool. And then we haven't heard the second guitar yet. There's like a harmonized chord part here, but that's guitar 1. So guitar 2 is doing a harmony of that part, and it's right here. That's really interesting. So that's like an implied, what, A sus2 add sharp 11. And then we're going to put that F sharp in the bass right there. So that's the first part. And then it's going to basically stretch back here, and we're grabbing this G, that A, and that B, and that A right there. That's like a crazy Holdsworth chord right there. And then there. So guitar 2 is definitely not for the faint of heart, but when you put those guitars together, it's pure magic. It's evil magic, but it's magic. Really cool and super creepy too. Right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at the Chords of Annihilator. And I have to admit, originally I had a completely different lesson planned. And then I looked at it, like on the sheet that I make, and I was like, well, it's just a bunch of power chord riffs. And I love power chords and power chord riffs, don't get me wrong, but this is chord play. And I thought, well, I need to dive a little bit deeper than that. So I did start, cutting some things. I had a long list of songs that I'd made. And, once I realized I didn't want to only show power chord riffs, and then I started to notice all the clean guitar parts and clean chords and some of those eerie and spooky sounding parts in their songs. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to grab some of that stuff. So I tried to serve up like a mix of distorted riffs and clean riffs. But there's something about those clean chords. It really does deliver this scary, kind of eerie sound. I mentioned that earlier, like acoustic piano, too. Like a real eerie piano part is way scarier than like a heavy power chord riff, or at least that's what I feel. And you can blend the two, and you can make power chords and stuff sound evil or, sinister or whatever. But there's something about the clean side of things, clean guitar, acoustic guitar, piano and some of that stuff. It really does kind of add this scary, spooky factor to music. So it's just really interesting and kind of what I focused on. So just a heads up for this lesson. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to my lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.